Great. So looks like we'll get started. Um, First, thank you everyone for joining. I know we'll have some people flow in and out as we kick off. And especially our Summer of AI series, our third speaker is Tara. We're very excited to have you. So a big welcome. Thank you for joining. And to our virtual attendees, thank you for calling in. Topic today is MMC's journey to assemble a talent acquisition AI technology stack. Just a quick introduction about Tara. For those of you who don't know her, she is the head of global talent acquisition at Marsh & McLennan based in New York. Marsh & McLennan brings together nearly 65,000 experts in risk, strategy, and people across Marsh, Guy Carpenter, Mercer, and Oliver Wyman. Serving clients, very global org across over 130 countries. Tara's also the former SVP of talent acquisition at Fidelity Investments. Before Fidelity at New York Life, ADP, Hewitt, Aon Hewitt, leading domestic and global talent acquisition teams. So a big welcome to Tara when she's not at MMC, she's also focused on future of workers, and especially on college graduates, returnees to the workforce, and emerging transferable skills. All good stuff we will get into. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Athena. Thanks for having me.
Great. So our first discussion today, I think, Tara, what we're especially interested in, given the expansive kind of organizations and experience you've had at different companies that are probably at different levels of their HR transformations, especially talent acquisition, innovation phases and agendas. I'd love if you could kind of kick off with just how you think about lessons learned implementing TA innovation agendas at the various companies you've been at, especially for those joining in, the best practices, managing through the executive stakeholders, the HR stakeholders, the individual team members that have to adopt this change.
So I guess there's a couple things. And when I look at the participant list, I think all of us have been in a series of similar meetings where oftentimes you hear that talent acquisition isn't working. All right, it's kind of the side I often take. And a lot of it is the ecosystem of talent acquisition is working. It's not actually always the actual act of recruiting, but it's all of the things that can make recruiting successful, which is really a common understanding of what the business goals we're trying to achieve, how we go after talent and identify what kind of talent we need. And so what I'm seeing as far as those companies that are embracing it faster and smarter than others is there has to really be a common understanding of what problems are we trying to solve, what are your talent needs and talent gaps, and how do we try to close the gap based on both internal capabilities as well as understand the capabilities in the marketplace. And so what I see is those organizations that are moving faster, or even groups within a larger organization, have a very clear understanding of what their business is, how their business is changing, and what do they need to either help retrain internal colleagues or acquire in the marketplace. And they're very crisp about the skills, the experiences, and the qualifications that they're looking. They're not looking for a laundry list of 20 things. They're very specific. And the recruiter, the sourcer, the hiring manager, they're all in agreement on priority as well.
Yeah, I think it's a great point in the TA isn't working. And, you know, how much of that is perhaps the stack or the vision for certain components might not all connect together with an end-to-end vision, and or have you found the person that you count on to adopt this overarching change of agenda, maybe the change of role or this stack kind of is harder to adopt, more challenging. I know we come up on a lot of times calling it an adoption challenge or an engagement challenge, but would love, I guess, your thoughts on different varieties of that. Is it a disconnected stack? Is it not fully integrated? Is it kind of the upskilling of the team? What do you see as some of the ailments?
Yeah, I think unfortunately it's a combination of everything. And I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is, you know, technology should be used as an enabler, not as something that's going to solve everything. Recruiting is still a person-to-person sport. And technology, whether it's AI, your ATS, your text chats, your chatbots, they should all be there to make it simpler, easier, and hopefully easier to measure as well, but to give a better candidate, recruiter, and hiring manager experience. And so it's never just one thing. I do believe that you need to do a fair number of pilots before you wholesale incorporate some new piece of technology into your everyday system. But I do think once you've made the decision that something works, you have to give a clear path of adoption. Because when things are optional, it's a lot harder to enforce behavior changes. And we are a people business. People do things the way that they do things because that's either how they grew up or they were instructed. And with any change, you have to practice it. You have to give people a chance to fail. But hopefully you're taking the best of what works and then pulling that across the rest of the organization. I think you do have to force a little bit of the change. I always get a little nervous, not to belittle the Harvard Business Review, but every once in a while, you'll get fed an article from the Times or the Wall Street Journal or HBR and a leader says, we should be doing this. And in many cases, we should be. The challenge is, are we ready? Both the TA organization as well as the business community that's going to be asked to be part of the adoption. So I do think we have to make sure that we have the basics. Recruiter skills is a big part of it, but also anybody who's involved in the hiring process has to be equipped with the skill development as well.
Yeah, I'd love the, give people the ability to practice it and incorporate it, but kind of the clear direction from the management that this is an important component and this is an expectation. And I think when I look at leaders, and I think of you as someone who kind of wields the right balance between the sternness of why this is important, but also the ability to let people iterate. And maybe something that people think a little bit less about is how important talent acquisition metrics are, scorecards are, and you having that visibility of what's being adopted, what's not, how are we seeing that, how are we not? So maybe just a discussion on how you think about scorecards, how you think about the metrics you get fed, the importance of them in certain areas.
Well, I think there's a couple things. I think the pendulum swings on how important are metrics and which things should we be measuring. I think the important thing is, at the very least, you have to agree that data is important. And unless you identify which data elements are going to be driving your business, it's really hard to know what to measure. So my team has heard me say, like, if it's not in the system, it doesn't exist, right? So if I can't look at a candidate funnel or understanding what's our attraction capability or where are people falling out in the funnel, if you're doing something on an Excel spreadsheet, in my mind, it just doesn't exist. I can't measure it accurately. I think the other thing is we're doing, most of the people on the attendee list, talent acquisition is a business, right? We can't just treat it as a warm and fuzzy HR function. It is quantifiable. And so when you start to look at the return on investment, whatever tools we're trying to incorporate, whatever models we're trying to incorporate, we're also making a business case for why this way and why this tool. And utilization and optimization of that is a big part of, can it be productive? And sometimes the tools aren't great, or what I often think is it's a great idea, but it's the wrong time. And so sometimes we're just not ready for some of the ways that the TA technology is going. I do think in the HR spectrum, we're at the forefront because we're more consumer-like than some of the other HR functions. And so candidates have an expectation that, we're a consumer type of experience, even if you're a B2B company like we are. So I think there's a couple things that have to go into it, so understanding that the data collection is an important part. It is a decision-making tool, and it'll help guide us for what we're doing in the future, regardless of whether it's AI, chatbot, an 800 number. I don't care what you're using. Understanding how many interactions we're having is important.
Yep. And I think, Tara, the notion of, remember when we met right away, it was, if you're incorporating any new tech or turning on any new capabilities, how is that going to be expressed in the scorecard, or how is that going to express itself in the metric? Sometimes people treat them as two different parallels where they're implementing a new tool and only 3 months in at a QBR, 9 months later asking, well, what were we tracking and did that matter? And kind of the hand in hand with the implementation, thinking about what that data is going to be, your practice.
Yeah, and I think the flip side of that is, you know, some tools should not be used for everything, right? And so you really understand it, and also all recruiters don't need every tool, right? So how do you understand which tools make the most sense for either the function, the talent availability, or other aspects of what you're doing, and how do you incorporate those tools based on the difficulty to find talent, the organic candidate flow that you have, or other factors where you're needing something to either help with better quality or better quantity at some point in the process.
Yeah, great insights. I think a lot of people on the line are dealing with similar challenges of the agenda, and kind of how do you get ahead of a 1 year or 2 year look back that it didn't work, so now we're cutting funding, or now we're going to go back to the basics, or kind of the building blocks.
Yeah.
A question I have for you, I think especially relevant, one, both the role you hold, but two, and on behalf of, you know, Marshall McLennan and Mercer, is the notion of the recruiter of the future and the future of the TA function.
Yeah, and I think there, you know, there's all different models out there. There's, you know, going to a highly specialized model with, you know, sourcing at various junctures. There's the relationship management model where the recruiter is the primary interface with the hiring manager. And then there's some hybrid. I do think regardless of the role you have, you're going to have to be much more in tune with what is the talent landscape, where are the pockets of talent, and even in talking talent, it might actually revert to skills and capabilities, where we're finding more and more that, you know, tech is a great example. There's a shortage of tech people anywhere in the world. So if somebody isn't on paper just a tech person, how do you identify the skills and interests and capabilities and desire of people that might be in adjacent functions? And then organizations are going to have to figure out how to teach them certain things because they have the desire, interest, and aptitude to be able to take on a different role. So I do think a recruiter is going to have to be a little bit more of that translator for, if I did this, I can now do this, with the assistance of other types of tools and assessments and things along the way. So being able to talk to the market, being able to talk with data, anecdotes will still win the hearts and minds of people, but data is what's going to really move the function forward. And we have to be able to be an advisor. I mean, a lot of organizations, Gartner, Mercer, have been talking about this for years, but I think given how competitive most parts of the world are around critical talent and roles, we have to give more guidance to managers and leaders when they're thinking about their human resource and human capital planning. You know, don't try to set up a shop in a part of the world that talent or that educational system doesn't exist to feed that talent. TA, in partnership with their workforce planning and real estate and other folks, have to be able to have that conversation and the dialogue to be able to help shape the workforce.
Yeah, no, the talent advisory for people who don't spend as much time as you do, or many of those on the line do, kind of are shocked to hear that's kind of a common thing of total talent management and talent vision and talent advisory. And I think, how do you think about a tech stack that supports and enables that, but doesn't automate out the important parts of being human and the important parts of the advisory?
Yeah, I think that there are ways that a lot of the technologies, including yours, can help us identify what are the types of skills that, you know, are available, and what are the kind of skills that is really starting to limit your talent pool. And, you know, with or without the technology, you know, you can often not get every single thing that you want in a person that a hiring manager wants. So how do you prioritize the things that are going to give you the best availability to talent based on skills, qualifications, diversity, inclusion, to be able to really understand what are the differentiators? I think the other thing that organizations are doing, we're not currently doing it, I should say yet at Marshall McLennan, is really understanding what makes somebody great in the job, right? And because the work is changing, it's hard to understand, like, if job A, you had to do A, B, and C today, but in the future you're only doing B and then new skills of E and F because of automation and other things. How do you help identify the skills that you might have people don't know they should be talking about? So AI can help you do that. If you want to start to say, well, I really need someone who's going to be helping develop insights as opposed to just reporting. So how do you make that transition? And the language that we use, the taxonomy that managers start to use about the jobs will help influence that. It's not easy. And I think in a lot of ways, many organizations aren't ready to make the transition, particularly because there's been a lot of articles about how, organizations really do want to invest in the people that are here to help them make the transition. But it's hard when it's incremental change to get from, say, analog to digital processes, and you're not sure how that manifests itself in skill sets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think as talent acquisition, the world tends to think about just the external coming into our front door, but especially with COVID and talent redeployment and upskilling and more of this converging, I guess, how do you think of the merging of these silos?
I'm really excited about it. So we are actually starting to do some internal sourcing and talent matching and identification in some parts, in some cases for, a secondment or a short-term assignment. And in a couple of the businesses, they're actually doing tasks. So TA has been partnering with the HR departments to try to identify that work. And we're going to be looking for easy ways of doing that, whether it's with enterprise tools or point solutions. But some of it is we have to get employees talking about what they do and what they know. Oftentimes, you might have a skill that may not be easily identifiable in the job that you're doing today. In some cases, employees may have more information on their LinkedIn profile than they have on their internal talent solutions. So how do we really try to capture the full capabilities and opportunities that an internal colleague could do, short of asking everyone to raise their hand? We're also talking more of a push on internal mobility. There's an enterprise program that's taking a look at it. And it is going to start to force the question about transferable skills in a much more active way. I think we've been very good about looking at opportunities within what we call a business unit, but I think there's going to be more of a desire to look across a business unit. So how can you go from Marsh to Mercer or Mercer to Guy Carpenter or Oliver Wyman as we move forward, including going across to corporate functions.
Yeah. I think the data behind that, as you mentioned, having the data strategy sometimes is just as important as the automation and the future capability strategy, because if you find out that your workforce has far more data on LinkedIn and public profiles than you have within the org, but there's also often disconnected, right? ATS has the resume, the HCM has your current profile, if that was merged, versus thinking about these as distinct different systems, right?
Exactly. And I think that's why when a lot of the organizations went to sort of a enterprise solution as opposed to only point solutions, the hope is that we're smarter about this. And I think as we're deploying modules and other companies have, when we talk to them, it does take some time to get everybody on board. And also, I think employees need to have a confidence level that, providing the information is going to open up opportunities for them as well. But they also have to take a leap of faith in being bolder about exploring opportunities beyond just normal reporting lines.
Yeah. We have a question from the audience on how helpful has HiredScore been from a source of intel perspective, such as talent pool intelligence, market intel, human capital planning. I think specifically around talent pool surfacing, but maybe a question you want to take, Tara.
Yeah, so we're not leveraging all of the capabilities of HiredScore in full transparency. We're just currently using it in the US. But I will tell you that it's been a personal passion of mine to make sure that we're increasing utilization. Ironically, we've had the most success in our hardest to fill jobs. So some of our talent acquisition consultants who were the most skeptical in the beginning are now our converts. So some of our hardest to fill jobs, they've been able to use HiredScore to source our databases to be able to identify additional candidates, and the numbers are clear. Their time to find is faster, their time to close is faster, because they went beyond just the people that were applying, people that already knew about us as well. So we've been keeping tabs on how HiredScore is developing in the future, and I do think that there's promise as well.
Yeah.
It did, as Athena, as you know, it took us a while to get to adoption. And I do know it's a change, right? So you're asking people to fundamentally change the way that they work. But I think once we presented the data back, you know, we got smart about how to partner with you as well.
Yeah. And I think it connects to pre-AI workflows, post-AI toolkit, right? So
Yeah.
the notion of sourcing is more work. You have to approach these people. You have to get them to apply versus those who apply and it's just about moving them through the funnel. And actually it connects to, you know, the tool can work, but what is the training and the education and the mindset shift when you do have a post-AI toolkit and pre-AI thinking or a pre-AI mindset, and maybe the storytelling piece is what's so important, or using the data to say, where does it work and where does it not work? And let's double down on those where we can have it work, like hardest to fill roles, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think, you know, it is a little bit of a math game. I mean, this is an investment that we have chosen to make. And I want to make sure that we're getting the most out of the investment. Because particularly now, you know, with some potential economic uncertainty, we have to make sure that we are optimizing all of the tools and technology that we have. And that includes the productivity of the team as well. I mean, if we can, and we can show that when you use certain tools, things happen differently. And when you don't, you still may get good results, but are you getting great results as well?
So the benchmarking and the side-by-side to kind of convert internal
Yes.
stakeholders. No, that's great. And those on the line, feel free to ask questions and we'll try to take them in stride. I think a great question for you, Tara, is especially these really hard challenges of TA like diversity and inclusion. How are you thinking about data, technology, systems versus maybe the older methods of unconscious bias training and kind of the other things that have been done in the past?
Yeah, so I actually think we have to do some of them all over again. And then we have to be able to see, you know, how can we advance certain aspects more quickly than others? And again, unfortunately, it comes back to data. You know, I don't want to ask anyone to have to identify somebody's ethnicity, right? That's not fair. It doesn't make any sense. And you might even say it's illegal in some parts of the world. So I do think that, you know, from a recruiting standpoint, I stand by our job is to be able to provide a diverse, qualified slate of individuals. And we have to understand what does that mean and how do we source them? We are starting conversations about, you know, are some of the qualifications that we put into job, in my technical term of overstuffing a job description, is that in and of itself excluding people from the process, right? And so sometimes it does. If you're asking for somebody with 25 years of experience with certain degrees, some of those degrees may never have existed in a world where even women were going to college for some of these things. So you are by default excluding a whole audience. I'm seeing there is less and less emphasis on years of experience and the type of degree you're getting, master's or bachelor's. I think there's a much more of an acceptance of alternative channels of education. If people can really demonstrate outcomes and the impact of their work. So I do think that we need to figure out, is the data able to tell us a story about who are we organically attracting or by additional advertising with the broadest definition of diversity? And then where we are able to track race, ethnicity, disability, whatever the categories are that we're legally allowed to attract, do we understand how they progress through the candidate funnel? And do we see areas where people are opting out themselves or they're opting out because of the process? And then we have to do a little bit more investigative conversations about why. But, you know, early days to understand, you know, does an ad attract men and women equally? Sometimes just the change of a noun or a verb can make that a 50-50 kind of talent pool. Other times you have to change the language that you're using and that you're talking about in the qualifications. You can look at the labor pool. I think the last thing is, you know, where are you fishing, right? So, you know, if you live in a market and there's a geographic need to have people live locally, is that market itself diverse, however you're defining diversity? And if it's not, we have to have an honest conversation. Don't set an expectation that we're going to have a multicultural workforce when it is not in a multicultural environment. And I'm not just talking about the US either, I'm talking about worldwide. Whatever the underrepresented challenge we're trying to get, how do we conquer that? And can tools help us do that in a faster way is one of the questions we're trying to answer right now.
Mm-hmm. I see the increasing kind of understanding there's no silver bullet to this problem called how do we build a more inclusive and diverse workforce globally. And I wonder, you know, are you guys taking the approach of saying, in some places it's a front door, in some places it's the society we operate in others it could be an organizational bias, let's see the data behind that, or it could be how we market it. And so how do you take that hybrid on a global scale where even the definition of underrepresented is different country by country and kind of report back that to the business?
Yeah, unfortunately, some of this is just common sense, right? So, I mean, you know, we're trying to align on the definition of what does a diverse slate mean. And so, you know, when you look at the data, you know, if you have at least 2 candidates who are diverse on a slate, you have a better chance of hiring diversity. So at a minimum threshold, let's say a diverse slate has to include 2 underrepresented people. Now, in HR, that could be a man, right? It doesn't necessarily mean it's a woman, right? So I think you also have to know what are the business challenges you're trying to solve. I think the other thing we're trying to figure out is, you know, when we're collecting data, what is legally required? And then is there a different common practice on how people identify themselves, and how do we align that as a company and make sure that people both feel comfortable providing the information, because there are generational differences we're finding as to who wants to provide and who doesn't. And then really understanding, is there a better way of sourcing? I could argue that around the world, people graduating from college are one of the most diverse group of recent grads that we've had ever, right? So should everybody be focusing on how do we make sure that we're doing an excellent job early in career to be able to then move people forward? But you can't leave mid-career and more senior people like myself, you can't leave them at the door, right? Because they are part of what's making a firm move forward. And so it's got to be a little bit of everything, unfortunately. But I think the business articulating the priorities is a big piece, because we could spread a diversity recruiting strategy like peanut butter, but I'm not sure it's going to be effective.
Yeah, right. The clarity of what's our objective,
Exactly.
and then how do we quantify that? One question that we got asked was, how do you see technologies such as tools like HiredScore impacting the candidate experience? But sometimes it's what you're using back office to then affect front office, and other times it's technologies you're using that directly affect the candidates.
So again, you know, the design mantra we're using is simplification, right? And personalization. So I think along the way, tools like HiredScore allow us to have that experience. I love it when I get a thank you from somebody who interviewed with us 4 months ago, and all of a sudden they can't believe a recruiter called them again because they found us in the database. I mean, you always hear about the black hole of recruiting, but you know, the increase in technology tools does allow us to take advantage of people that already know that they have an interest in us. And, you know, we use, you know, silver and bronze medalists, but there are a lot of people that have qualifications beyond the job that they applied for. I get a lot of thank yous when a recruiter has found somebody in the database who applied for the job, you know, and there can only be one person in the job, and then another job comes available 3-4 months later, or a slightly different pivot. And the recruiter says, you know what, they really have the skills to do this job. People are thrilled, and sometimes they honestly can't even believe it. So I do think that the technology enablement is going to be able to do that. And I do think that there is an expectation that if somebody has taken the time to apply, which includes also doing a video interview, that we're not just going to let them sit out there. I mean, they have invested time in trying to get to know us. And a great deal more personalization, whether they're joining our talent community or they're saying it's okay to reuse their data. These are all important inputs to how successful they want to be with us as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess maybe even once they click that, consider me in the future, they probably also expect you will actually consider them in the future if they went through and permissioned that. And so carrying out that, you know, employer responsibility of if there's a job of the future for them.
Yeah.
a lot's been spoken also, I think, about underrepresented groups applying to maybe the wrong job for them, or a job where the better represented group is more qualified or has more experience. So how do you almost route automatically diverse candidates, or utilize diverse pipelines, or do a lot of that strategic sourcing and nurturing in strategic ways? I don't know if that's something.
Yeah, so I don't think we're currently there yet at Marsh McLennan, but we are starting to get there. So for example, you know, is a 4-year degree needed for every single job? I'm not convinced, right? And if because we were joking, a lot of our senior executives, including a few, never graduated from college, right? Highly successful. So like in today's world, do we really have to understand what is it that we need people to be able to do? And, you know, do the educational qualifications, are they also impeding somebody's ability? And so that's why, you know, some of the business leaders are progressively talking about, let's talk about what we need to get done in the job. I can't say it's widespread yet because we're just really starting to tug at a little bit of this. But I think it's positive intent to make sure that we are being as inclusive as possible. And then again, it's the ongoing dialogue. Particularly, I think it's hardest on leaders when they've had somebody who's been in the job and then the person leaves or gets promoted or moves on within the firm. You know, they want somebody who can do all of those things plus new skills. And that's a tall order to fill. And so talking about the priorities, what's important, you know, do you want somebody who has done this exact job, and then you have to say, okay, why would they do this exact job if they already know how to do it? Or can people take a risk and look at somebody who has 60 or 80% of the ability, and then they're going to learn the rest as they're moving into the job over a certain amount of time? And that's a more challenging conversation. I mean, that's about wholesale change as well.
Yeah, well, it brings back to, with these tools and technologies and capabilities, how does it change the perception of service that the business is gaining from TA, right? And the strategic partnership. And so I guess, how do you think about the way the business measures, perceives satisfaction scores or thank you notes, or even bringing TA maybe into discussions earlier, not just when they have a job they need posted?
Yeah, so I think the good news is we've gone through and we're in the middle of we're calling it reimagine wholesale around the HR function, which is really identifying the opportunities that, you know, there are certain roles that leaders want us to constantly be pipelining. That wasn't the way that the organization was designed several years ago, and we're making that shift now. But we're really doing it based on what the organization says is important to them, what, you know, what we would traditionally call critical roles, in what part of the world, at what level of the organization, so that when they do identify a need, that we've got a pipeline of talent that not just TA has spoken to, but also their leadership team has spoken to, right? So this commitment to, we'll constantly find people, but you need to constantly talk to people, right? So it is a partnership around that, and we're in the early stages. We've got 2 examples that are really up and running, and it's a very collaborative bi-weekly conversation with leaders that is really making a difference in everybody knowing the market. I believe that there are tools that can help us do this more efficiently. And we're starting to look and evaluate those as well. And so, you know, it is still a lot of work. It does require research and conversations and looking at diversity and inclusion. But it is something that we can move forward, but TA is not doing it in a vacuum. We really need the business commitment if we're going to make the shift, because again, it's another way that we're saying we're going to spend our money this way for both people, time, and technology. And there has to be a buy-in to that use of time.
Yeah, probably continual reiteration of that across the business as you prove out the journey. So something interesting, we've talked a lot about the technology. Key developments and key trends you see outside of just tech itself. You know, one of the things you mentioned was a head of strategic workforce planning role for the first time, and some of these other changes they think are important as complements.
Yeah, so we actually have 2 roles open, just in case anyone's interested. Right? Strategic workforce planning role that's open, and we actually also have a chief operating officer for HR, both brand new roles to the organization. And I'm thrilled about both of them, but in particular, I'm, you know, really passionate about the strategic workforce planning, because I do think, like many organizations, we understand the financial implications of how many people do we have. We're over 75,000 people right now based on an acquisition in the last 18 months. Our work is changing, the environment is changing. COVID actually put more pressure on us because what was perceived as very much a face-to-face business has defied that and it's a very virtual organization. So it is really important to understand, you know, the what, the where, the who, the why, the how many. And it's not just, I need to hire 30 people next year. It's what are the 30 people you need to hire and why? And so that for us, I think is going to be game changing for allowing TA to actually perform better. Because we're, us like many other organizations are flying a little blind sometimes. And that doesn't help us, you know, wow our customer group as well.
Yeah. And your two-sided customer, the candidate customer and the business customer.
Exactly. Exactly. I was talking to a group of individuals earlier in their career, and they're like, how do I know this job is real if it's posted? And I finally said, look, if they're still posting it, at some point they're going to hire it. So just please apply for the job, because this is what a lot of recruiters are doing now. They're pipelining. They're trying to understand what are the most important jobs. And, you know, so many companies, including us, we took down by and large jobs we just didn't know. And as they're coming back, these are the jobs that people want to fill.
Yeah. Tara, one question we have from the audience, and we'll just get to one of these and then a closing challenge question for you is you've cited the importance of partnership with the business numerous times as the success factor for TA transformation. Who do you feel are your strongest allies on the executive team? Or, you know, it doesn't have to be MMC specific across the different orgs. Where do you kind of need that pillar? And how does that change the ability to deliver?
So I would ordinarily say, if you can really delight the people that make the revenue, you're good. And I, you know, because you can demonstrate your ability in a more succinct way, you can really demonstrate your ability to show by filling these jobs with the right people at the right time, you're impacting the revenue stream of the organization. I think the other piece is if you have business units or functions that are going through significant digitization or transformation or rationalization of where in the world are they going to be hiring, that's the other piece. That if you are in frequently and early with them to be able to show what the talent landscape looks like, those are two groups that you can really help them win their business case, not just make it, but exceed their business case as well.
Yeah. Great. So our challenge question, and for those who have more questions they'd like to ask Tara about specifics, not to put her on the spot, but Tara, you are on LinkedIn and willing to connect with other professionals on the line. Two questions for you. I think biggest lesson learned you wish you'd known early in your career of leading these transformations.
You know, it's always the don't make any assumptions rule. I mean, things that, you know, we may take for granted about what somebody understands about how recruiting works. Just, you know, you have to start with the basics. I mean, it's gotten, at one organization, I literally had to sit down and explain to some senior executives, this is how people look for jobs today. Okay. And so like, it's not the newspaper, you know, it's the online version. And these are how many places people go to check out your company. It's like buying a car. And so don't undervalue how much you have to educate people who even think that they understand it or believe that they did a stint in recruiting even 5 years ago is too long ago to understand what's going on in recruiting right now. So that's one piece. And then I think, you know, where I'm not a very patient person, I've had to learn, you know, biting my lip on how to be patient, and I know I'm not good at it. But I do think that making sure that you can talk to numbers is one thing that definitely turns heads. And because you can articulate how, you know, reducing a vacancy can impact the bottom line. You can make a business case for sourcers, which we are, by the way, going to be hiring, and why they can be a differentiator if the business is willing to commit the time to help identify and interview people before they have an opening. And if we do that, we can actually increase diversity of the candidate flow as opposed to somebody just talking to people that they know in the marketplace. So really leading with getting to the data, and it's the mutual data that I think is going to be able to help me move forward. Oftentimes, you know, this TA is broken comment. I've never really seen an organization where it's only TA that's broken, right? It's everything that incorporates a commitment to hire the best talent.
And a domino effect.
Yes.
And then the closing question is, unless we have anything else on the line, is most pressing item you feel as a TA leader kind of to be aware of in driving that future workers?
Yeah, I do think that COVID has probably changed my answer a little bit. I think while we've all embraced working remotely, and, you know, I don't know anyone who really hasn't stepped up, I do get a little concerned about the isolation, right? And so for me, making sure that we continue to have an engaged community, whether it's a TA community or a partnership with business and HR, understanding that this can be exhausting. And we have to make sure that we understand how do we work through this in a very healthy manner, because I don't see it slowing down. Even if we're, you know, 5% back, 25% back, people's confidence level just isn't there to say, I'm going to commute the same way I commuted, you know, 5 months ago. So for me, it's really how do we come out of COVID in a different way that is still equally productive, and people feel good about coming to work every day.
Well, Tara, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure having you join. And thank you to our wonderful guest. We have next week, Sun Life will be giving our Summer of AI, so feel free to join there on global talent acquisition tech strategies. And thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.